While President Trump is dominating the headlines with talk of extending the ceasefire today, he is completely missing the true crisis unfolding in the shadows. A chilling ultimatum from Tehran and a deafening silence from Beijing that has just left the entire Arab Gulf completely isolated. Allow me to guide you through a pivotal event that occurred today, one that is remarkably simple once you view the comprehensive geopolitical picture. The mainstream coverage will likely fixate on the extended ceasefire, canceled diplomatic trips to Pakistan, and recently seized maritime vessels. While those events are undeniably real, there is a specific declaration published through Iranian state media today that completely overshadows them. I want to provide you with the exact phrasing before analyzing its profound implications. The commander of the aerospace force for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a direct message to Iran's Gulf neighbors, specifically Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. He stated unequivocally that if their land or facilities are utilized by adversarial forces to launch attacks against Iran, those nations should essentially bid farewell to their oil production capabilities across the Middle East. This was not a hidden memo. Iran's state-affiliated news agency publicly broadcasted this expanded target list this morning. This updated list goes far beyond standard military installations to specifically name major oil fields and critical refineries, complete with precise geographical coordinates. Consider the magnitude of the facilities explicitly named on this broadcasted list today. It includes the massive ExxonMobil and Dow chemical facilities situated in Jubail, Saudi Arabia. It targets the Yanbu complex located on the Red Sea coast, which boasts a capacity of 250,000 barrels per day. It identifies the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, a critical piece of infrastructure designed specifically to bypass the vulnerable Strait of Hormuz. The list also highlights the ExxonMobil Ras Laffan facility in Qatar, handling 146,000 barrels daily, the Bapco refinery in Bahrain designed for 267,000 barrels, the vital Fujairah storage hub in the Emirates, Kuwait's Ahmadi refinery processing 36,000 barrels, the immense SATORP refinery in Saudi Arabia pushing 460,000 barrels, and finally, the colossal Manifa plant responsible for a staggering 900,000 barrels per day. These are not abstract geopolitical concepts. These are exact facilities that collectively process millions of barrels of the world's energy supply every single day. Now, securely hold that terrifying reality in your mind as we introduce the second, even more critical fact. In response to this unprecedented threat, China has said absolutely nothing. There has been no urgent press conference, no stern foreign ministry readout, and no frantic diplomatic call to Tehran demanding restraint. Beijing has offered zero commentary on this explicit threat to disable the energy infrastructure of every Gulf state that permits its territory to be used against Iranian interests. I want to deeply explore why this profound silence is the most significant event to transpire in the region today. The spoken threat is merely what Iran announced. The silence is the powerful message China is sending to the Gulf states regarding the future. Without uttering a single syllable, Beijing is telling the Arab world that they are entirely on their own. Let us meticulously dissect what this aerospace commander's threat truly signifies, because conventional media is mistakenly brushing it off as standard aggressive rhetoric. It is far from it. While escalatory language has been common throughout this conflict, this specific declaration operates in a completely different category for three distinct reasons. First, it identifies exact named facilities. Previous warnings broadly referenced Gulf maritime ports or general energy supplies. This recent statement pinpoints the Manifa plant, the Bapco facility, and the Ahmadi refinery by their specific names. This level of granularity is never accidental. When a high-level military command broadcasts a target list detailing specific industrial sites and their daily capacities, it is signaling absolute operational readiness. They are conveying that the strategic targeting work is finalized, the coordinates are locked in, and the only remaining variable is the political authorization to strike. Second, the condition attached to this threat is starkly explicit and entirely binary. If the Gulf nations allow their sovereign territory or infrastructure to be leveraged by adversarial forces, which clearly implies the United States and its allies, their petroleum production will be systematically dismantled. This is not a cautionary tale about a hypothetical future scenario. American forces are actively utilizing Gulf military bases at this very moment. The United States Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain. American military personnel are operating out of Qatar, Kuwait, and the Emirates. Furthermore, American forces have been running aerial operations into Iranian airspace from these regional bases since late February. Therefore, the explicit condition required for retaliation has already been met. The Iranian commander is essentially stating that Tehran has temporarily chosen to withhold its fire, but that deliberate choice could be reversed at any given second. Third, we must analyze the timing. This severe warning was issued shortly after the ceasefire was indefinitely extended, immediately following the seizure of 2 vessels by the American Navy, right after the former president mocked the seized cargo as a gift, and right after Iranian forces launched retaliatory drones toward American military ships. This is absolutely not an opening gambit. It is simply the newest, most dangerous rung on an escalation ladder that Tehran has been steadily climbing for months, with every single step reaching higher than the last. Before we examine the impossible dilemma facing the Gulf states, we must add another complex layer to this geopolitical chessboard, a layer completely ignored by mainstream analysis. China is not the only global superpower utilizing strategic silence or careful messaging. Russia is executing a highly sophisticated parallel strategy. Moscow initiated direct contact with Tehran today, featuring a high-level conversation between Foreign Minister Lavrov and his Iranian counterpart. According to the official Russian readout, Moscow reaffirmed its unwavering readiness to help resolve the ongoing crisis. Simultaneously, the Iranian state media's version of that exact same phone call highlighted that Tehran confirmed its absolute readiness to guarantee the safe, unimpeded transit of all Russian maritime vessels through the highly contested Strait of Hormuz. Within a single conversation, these 2 heavily sanctioned nations exchanged incredibly specific, mutually beneficial commitments. Moscow secured a priceless shipping guarantee, while Tehran acquired an invaluable layer of strategic diplomatic armor. It is crucial to note that this strategic exchange occurred on the exact same day that Tehran was aggressively rejecting every single invitation to participate in regional mediation talks. Analyze that stark asymmetry. Tehran has refused to give a definitive yes to Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, or Saudi Arabia. Yet, they have already preemptively assured Moscow about the security of the Strait of Hormuz, completely independent of whether the current ceasefire holds or collapses. Moscow is not acting as a neutral peace broker. Moscow operates as Tehran's powerful patron. The Russian strategy is designed to ensure that whether this conflict ends in a diplomatic settlement or spirals into an expanded regional war, Russian commercial fleets will safely navigate the strait, and the Russian economy will continue to reap the massive rewards of artificially inflated global energy prices. Recent data perfectly illustrates this reality. Russian petroleum revenues nearly doubled from roughly $9 billion in February to a staggering $19 billion in March, driven entirely by the market panic surrounding the Hormuz closure. Moscow is quietly generating $500 million every single day from a conflict where it has not fired a single bullet. And now they possess a concrete, negotiated guarantee from Tehran, ensuring that their lucrative maritime operations remain untouched. If hostilities resume, the massive financial windfall continues flowing into Moscow. If a diplomatic breakthrough occurs, Moscow effortlessly positions itself as a stabilizing global actor. It is a flawless win-win scenario for the Russian Federation. This intricate web is the true geopolitical architecture surrounding the newly announced threat against Arab energy sites. You have Beijing remaining utterly silent, continuously purchasing massive quantities of sanctioned crude oil and providing impenetrable diplomatic cover at the United Nations. You have Moscow vocally supporting Tehran, stockpiling immense financial windfalls and extracting exclusive maritime safety guarantees. And trapped right in the middle, you have the vulnerable Gulf states caught between an American security umbrella that is undeniably real, but ultimately insufficient against mass drone swarms, and a formidable alignment of Eastern powers that possesses zero motivation to see this conflict resolved strictly on American terms. This brings us to the agonizing position of nations like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar. These sovereign states are trapped in an absolute nightmare scenario that exponentially worsens with every passing week of this crisis. They willingly host massive American military installations. They rely heavily on security assurances from Washington, which serve as the foundational bedrock of their entire national defense strategy. They are deeply dependent on advanced American aerial defense networks, sophisticated intelligence sharing, and immense naval power to shield their fragile energy infrastructure from the exact type of catastrophic attacks that are currently being openly threatened. Consequently, abruptly severing their profound military ties with Washington is simply not a realistic option. Their relationship with the United States spans decades and is inextricably linked to both their military survival and their long-term economic prosperity. Yet, these same leaders are forced to watch as their most critical, specific energy production sites are openly placed in the crosshairs. And they are simultaneously watching as the diplomatic response from their Western allies remains distressingly inadequate when measured against the sheer scale of the looming devastation. It is widely reported that Riyadh is urgently, aggressively lobbying Washington to permanently abandon the current maritime blockade. They are not offering polite suggestions. They are applying intense diplomatic pressure. This desperation stems from a private, chilling communication wherein Tehran informed Saudi leadership that if the blockade is maintained, absolutely no commercial port in the entire region will remain secure. This is precisely why Saudi officials warmly welcomed mediation teams from Pakistan, praising their constructive dialogue, because Riyadh desperately requires this conflict to conclude before that published target list morphs into an active military operations order. The situation in the Emirates is equally precarious. Authorities recently apprehended over 24 individuals accused of operating a clandestine network aligned with Tehran. Following this confirmation, Iranian officials immediately issued severe public condemnations. Crucially, this tense diplomatic exchange unfolded on the exact same day that Emirati oil facilities were formally added to the Aerospace Command's public hit list. The Emirates is simultaneously hosting American combat forces, dismantling illicit intelligence networks, and watching sophisticated missiles being aimed directly at their most lucrative refineries. Similarly, Qatar is home to the most expansive American air base in the entire region. Their massive Ras Laffan complex processes approximately 20% of the globe's liquefied natural gas demand every day. That very same facility was explicitly named as a primary target. Much like its neighbors, Qatar is desperately attempting to avoid being dragged into a catastrophic war that directly threatens the delicate infrastructure forming the absolute core of its economic existence. Kuwait is facing the exact same terror, with its massive Ahmadi refinery proudly displayed on the target list, prompting Kuwaiti diplomats to push frantically for immediate de-escalation. Finally, Bahrain, the proud host of the American Fifth Fleet, saw its primary Bapco refinery listed. Bahrain lacks the political and logistical power to evict that fleet, even if they desired to do so. Yet the fleet's very presence is the precise justification being weaponized to legitimize an attack on their domestic energy production. For these Arab nations, absolute neutrality is an illusion. Their military bases are actively engaged, and their sovereign territory has already been integrated into the logistical infrastructure of this ongoing conflict. The leadership in Tehran is acutely aware of this vulnerability. The explicit threat was masterfully designed to force these nations to feel the immense, suffocating cost of a geopolitical reality. They have no immediate power to alter, and this is exactly where the strategic silence from Beijing becomes the most dominant variable of the entire equation. Beijing is far from a passive, disinterested observer in this arena. They remain the single largest consumer of Iranian crude oil, a status they have fiercely maintained throughout the entirety of this crisis. Extensive maritime tracking data reveals that over 11 million barrels of crude have secretly navigated toward Chinese ports since late February. The infamous Dark Fleet, a vast network of vessels operating with disabled transponders, conducting covert mid-ocean transfers, and processing payments through independent financial networks outside the standard global banking system, has been operating flawlessly without interruption. While Tehran's revenue streams have undoubtedly sustained damage, they have not been fatally severed. The vital margin between economic hardship and total systemic collapse is entirely provided by this relentless Chinese purchasing mechanism. Furthermore, Beijing famously utilized its veto power at the United Nations Security Council to block resolutions aimed at aggressively reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a move strongly supported by Moscow. Consequently, Tehran never had to expend energy fighting that diplomatic battle. It was definitively won on their behalf before it even commenced. Chinese diplomats have continuously labeled Western maritime blockades as reckless, consistently urging peaceful dialogue while loudly championing the mediation efforts spearheaded by Pakistan. Yet, on the exact day that a comprehensive hit list of Gulf energy sites was broadcast to the world, Beijing offered full vocal support for the peace mediators while maintaining absolute, impenetrable silence regarding the catastrophic threat. This specific combination of vocal support and deafening silence is a meticulously calculated strategic posture. Beijing aggressively champions the diplomatic route because prolonged negotiations keep the fragile ceasefire breathing, which in turn ensures that their massive commercial shipping vessels continue safely transiting through the strait. They refuse to comment on the direct threats to Arab infrastructure because speaking out would trap them in a diplomatic no-win scenario. Condemning the threat would severely damage a strategic alliance with Tehran that took a decade to forge. Conversely, openly endorsing the threat would instantly trigger a massive confrontation with the Gulf states, nations that currently host hundreds of billions of dollars in Chinese infrastructure investments and supply roughly 30% of China's daily crude oil requirements. Therefore, the most powerful move is to say absolutely nothing, and to do so with profound intentionality. However, we must understand exactly what this calculated silence communicates to the terrified leadership in the Gulf. It serves as a stark confirmation that if those targeted facilities are actually struck, Beijing will not utilize its massive diplomatic leverage to intervene. They will not pick up the phone and demand that the attacks cease. They will refrain from issuing harsh condemnations. They will likely express generic, performative concern, urge all involved parties to exercise restraint, and simultaneously continue purchasing massive shipments of sanctioned crude. Beijing's silence does not necessarily mean they actively desire the destruction of these refineries. It simply means they are completely unwilling to pay any political or economic price to prevent it. For the isolated Gulf states, understanding the brutal distinction is the single most terrifying realization of this entire conflict. This dynamic perfectly illustrates a concept we can call the confidence ladder. Every single time a boundary is violently tested, and the resulting consequences prove to be survivable, the confidence to test the next, more dangerous boundary dramatically increases. Every step taken up this perilous ladder relies on the exact same foundational support. The relentless flow of economic oxygen from Beijing ensures systemic viability regardless of intense Western pressure. Concurrently, unwavering diplomatic shielding at the United Nations guarantees that no unified, devastating global response will ever force a genuine strategic retreat. Observe the historical sequence of these escalating steps. The initial closure of the Maritime Strait was a major step, and Western forces were unable to permanently pry it back open through sheer military force. Allowing a temporary ceasefire while simultaneously enforcing strict tolls and restricting free passage was another step, which was ultimately tolerated. The military command openly overruling their own top diplomat to slam the strait shut again, only to see the ceasefire extended anyway, was yet another massive step. Firing unmanned aerial vehicles at highly advanced military vessels and facing no immediate catastrophic retaliation was another bold step up the ladder. And today, broadcasting a highly specific, named target list of critical energy infrastructure represents the highest rung reached thus far. The only remaining step above this one is the physical execution of those strikes. This relentless climb is entirely enabled by the assurance that the financial cost of extreme escalation remains substantially lower than the political cost of submission, thanks to uninterrupted foreign purchases. This behavior is not born out of sheer military supremacy. After enduring nearly 2 months of relentless aerial operations, the domestic military apparatus, including air defense and missile networks, has been noticeably degraded. Rather, this aggression stems from pure strategic confidence, the absolute certainty that they possess an international partner whose quiet backing makes even the most extreme escalation fundamentally survivable. The absolute silence from that powerful partner today is the most glaring confirmation of exactly where that dangerous confidence originates. The Arab nations are not paralyzed by a fear of conventional military overmatch. They are acutely aware that sophisticated air superiority is not required to severely damage a stationary refinery. It only requires a massive volume of cheap drones and cruise missiles, weapons that are stockpiled in the thousands. More importantly, it requires the aggressor to firmly believe that the aftermath of launching those weapons will not result in total national collapse. The steady, hidden flow of energy revenue provides exactly that dangerous belief. As long as that financial pipeline remains functional and the silence persists, the capacity and the oxygen to execute that devastating target list remain fully intact. This is the suffocating trap that has been perfectly laid around the Gulf states, entirely without firing a single weapon or making a single public declaration. Western forces provide a robust military shield, but they cannot realistically guarantee absolute protection for massive, sprawling industrial sites against overwhelming swarm tactics without plunging into an apocalyptic regional war that Washington desperately wishes to avoid. Meanwhile, the one global superpower possessing the actual economic leverage required to alter this terrifying calculus has consciously opted to remain totally silent. The leadership in Riyadh fully comprehends this grim reality. Their intense pressure on Washington to lift the maritime blockade is not driven by any sudden ideological sympathy for their regional rival. It is driven by cold, hard mathematics. They calculate that if the strangling blockade persists, the target list will inevitably be activated. If that happens, their crown jewel facility, processing over 500,000 barrels daily, is immediately thrust into the line of fire. While advanced defense systems will undoubtedly intercept many incoming projectiles, the laws of probability dictate that some will inevitably slip through. And in the smoking aftermath, Beijing will merely issue a carefully worded statement expressing deep concern while urging all parties to act reasonably. In the most critical, strategic sense imaginable, the Gulf states are completely alone. They are not alone militarily, as Allied forces remain heavily entrenched. However, they are strategically abandoned, knowing that the only foreign power capable of decisively altering the cost-benefit analysis of their greatest threat thence has explicitly refused to intervene. This shatters the simplistic media narrative that frames the Gulf's future as a simple binary choice between blindly following Western directives or entirely defecting to an Eastern alliance. Their true path forward is a delicate, frantic negotiation regarding the speed and intensity of the pressure they apply to Washington. Saudi Arabia's push to end the blockade is a maneuver of sheer self-preservation, driven by the realization that economic strangulation merely provides hardliners with the perfect domestic justification to obliterate Arab infrastructure. Riyadh urgently desires an end to the hostilities, so the published target list fades into irrelevance, and they view rapid de-escalation as the most viable path to survival. The Emirates are navigating a similarly treacherous, though slightly nuanced, path. They have spent years meticulously weaving deep economic and technological ties with Eastern markets, integrating foreign telecommunications infrastructure, and welcoming massive maritime investments, always careful to avoid projecting an explicitly hostile posture toward Beijing. This deeply ingrained hedging instinct makes them incredibly sensitive to the current diplomatic silence. If their sprawling oil storage hubs can be openly targeted without drawing a single word of protest from their massive Eastern trading partners, the Emirates realize they must independently manage that crucial relationship regardless of Western preferences. Kuwait continues its historical tradition of cautious balance, utilizing quiet diplomacy as its primary cost-free defense mechanism against a geographical threat it simply cannot ignore. And Qatar remains the most tangled web of all, simultaneously hosting the region's largest Western airbase, conducting desperate peace mediations, and staring down the barrel of a threat aimed directly at their irreplaceable natural gas complexes. They cannot evict the military base, they cannot dismiss the target list, and they certainly cannot confront their largest energy customers over a lack of diplomatic support. Qatar is desperately trying to leverage its role as a mediator to diffuse all three existential pressures simultaneously before the powder keg finally ignites. This incredibly volatile landscape is the direct product of strategic silence. Every single Arab state in the Gulf is buckling under immense pressure they cannot resolve independently. They all recognize that the one voice capable of restoring stability refuses to speak. Consequently, each nation is quietly recalibrating its core understanding of national security, weighing the tangible protection of Western military hardware against the terrifying leverage of Eastern economic indifference. This profound realization, far more than the blockade or the broadcasted threats, is what will dictate the next critical phase of this geopolitical earthquake. In the crucial days ahead, closely monitor the diplomatic posture emanating from Riyadh. Watch carefully to see if nations that have historically championed the Western hardline begin transmitting subtle, accommodating signals across the Gulf. Look for any indication of clandestine diplomatic missions dispatched to Beijing, desperately seeking private guarantees or begging for intercession to protect their fragile energy grids. These monumental shifts will not be heralded by grand press conferences. They will only be visible through the conspicuous absence of further escalation and nuanced changes in official rhetoric. If you truly wish to comprehend the profound sense of isolation gripping the Arab Gulf today, do not waste your time analyzing what was spoken. You must analyze the deafening roar of what was intentionally left unsaid. Because right now, across the entire Middle East, that terrifying silence is the only message they can hear.